what advantage does virtualization have in an enterprise environment? Because obviously, in an enterprise environment, like we don't care about Photoshop free trials and stuff like that, right? Hold on,
Right.
right. So what do we actually care about?
Well, I guess isolation.
Isolation. Okay, but why not just run multiple machines? Like
Be
I can have multiple servers and they're isolated from each other, right?
because with server it would be only one connection instead of having multiple PCs with multiple connections.
I'm not sure I understand.
Like with a server, isn't it basically just this giant computer which is connected to other smaller computers?
Uh a server is basically a computer. Like there is
Yeah.
no qualitative difference between your computer that you're using right now to call me on Discord and a server. The only
Okay.
difference is in like what kind of application are you running on it.
Okay.
So server can either refer to the machine or it can refer to an application. So for instance, I could say when I say HTTP server or web server, I either mean the application. So let's see, what could be, for instance, NGINX or Jenkins. Let's say NGINX. I'm not sure about Jenkins. So the HTTP server can be the application running on a machine, or it can be the machine that runs the application.
Okay.
The machine that runs the application.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about here is more like the physical part, right? So the machine. So when I talk about servers, I'm talking about a machine that will be running 24/7, most likely,
Mm-hmm.
and will be running a service. For instance, a web service.
Okay.
So, do you have any idea? You had a really good idea with isolation. I'd like you to sort of follow that thought.
Well, if a server is running multiple virtual machines, I guess the virtual machines could be somehow dedicated to either a not I don't want to say a client, but a user's personal computer at their office or at home.
Oh, that's interesting. So, hold on. So you're talking like in the event that okay, let me see if I understand. So I have my server, and what I want to use this server so that so I want to run like let's say multiple Windows hosts on that server.
Yeah.
Right? And I want multiple remote users through the internet, for instance, and maybe through a VPN tunnel. Wink, wink. So let's see. That server would be physically connected to the internet. And then we reach a client somewhere. And so you're saying you'd like maybe the client needs their own sort of professional desktop, even though they're not at their desk. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Like if, for example, during the coronavirus or during the whole
Mm-hmm.
epidemic,
Yeah,
since I don't know if I can say that on Twitch,
it's fine.
well,
I don't care.
that could have been useful. Like if someone has a computer at home, but all their business files are stored at their office computer, if they can somehow
Mm-hmm.
remotely connect to the server and then to their computer at the office to retrieve these files, they would be
Yeah.
able to do their work a lot more efficiently than if they didn't have the files and would have to restart all over from scratch.
Mm-hmm. That's a good example. Yeah. So um, so I wanted to use the example of lockdown and all of that and remote working to explain why VPN technology is important for enterprises. So we'll do that later. Also, it'll come back.
Okay.
But yeah, this is a decent example. So let's say you have, for some reason, you want users to have like you want to store multiple desktop environments, that users can remotely access.
Yeah.
Well, then yeah, you'd absolutely have to run virtualization for that.
Yeah.
Like there's because the alternative would be to like literally let hundreds of personal computers running at all times and like configure them so that their specific user can like be specifically routed to it. Like it's a whole mess. We don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
That sounds
Right?
complicated and very
Yeah.
expensive for the
And,
end user.
and also you're talking about so the wear the you'd be wearing out a lot of component. Like you'd be wearing out hundreds of computers
That
instead of
too.
just one. Right.
So in the end,
And
it's gonna be very expensive.
it is. Like it's going to be physically very expensive. Yes. It's
Yeah.
not trivial at all.
I didn't even think about that.
And that's actually so the that physical component is actually the reason why we do virtualization. And virtualization goes way beyond just desktop environments.
How
There
far can
is,
it go?
well, in an enterprise environment, usually you want to instantiate some policy that one app equals, so for servers specifically, so one app would be, for instance, one HTTP server.
Yeah.
One app means one OS.
Okay.
You want to do that so that you can then tailor the operating system to perfectly serve the app. Because the problem is if you have multiple apps running on the same operating systems, well, you're never certain how these different apps are going to interact with each other.
Yeah.
So you want to isolate them as much as you can. So
Sort of
you want to run them on different operating systems.
sort of like the dual boot, how Linux and Windows can interact with each other.
They
You
don't.
don't.
They don't
Oh,
actually connect back. So in the case of dual boot, you would only be running one operating system at a time.
yeah, but I mean like how you deleted Linux and then it somehow affected the window.
Right, something like that. Except
Yeah.
like I'm talking about apps as in applications you can install on an operating system, not the
Yeah.
operating systems themselves. It's a little bit different, but that's kind of the general idea. Is you want isolation.
Okay.
So like you've probably had it on your own computer that a piece of software you've recently installed somehow changes the way another piece of software behaves.
That is annoying.
Right, it is. Well, then it would be a lot simpler if you had like one app for one operating system. You would never have that issue. Well, I can't say never because isolation is never perfect, but
It
basically
would,
never.
yeah, would limit
Right.
the
Right.
interactions.
Right. But then without virtualization, we run into the issue that we need one physical server per app. Right? So for instance, and this is why, so for instance, we'd have the HTTP server and we'd have one app running on it. And then we'd have another server dedicated for FTP, for instance, with one app running on it, and so on and so forth. The problem with that is, well, maybe your HTTP server isn't running at full power all the time. Maybe it's running at like 10% when idle, 10% CPU utilization. And
Yeah.
maybe the FTP server is running at 20% CPU utilization. And
Well,
maybe you have another server, like, let's see, you have a Minecraft server, obviously very important in enterprise.
yes, the only thing that matters.
You have a Minecraft server, and this one is maybe running at 50% CPU utilization.
Won't that be very expensive for the components?
Yes, actually, yes, that's the whole point. This is so phenomenally expensive. You have to keep 3 machines running at like all the time, 24/7. And you're
Just
not even
without
using like
notice.
you're not even using half of their power. Usually you want to sit around 70% CPU utilization. That's a good spot to be in. You're using a lot of your compute power, but you still have enough you still have enough margin that if there's a burst of activity, you can manage it.
Okay.
So if you have one machine, one physical machine per service, per application, like you're going to run into that issue of like CPU utilization. And I'm just mentioning CPU utilization, but obviously you also have RAM utilization. You have
Well, the
network
hard drive makes the
networking as well.
yeah.
Like you have all of these components that like you're probably barely using half of them at best. So you've paid for something that's not worth it. You know, the last thing your boss wants to hear is that he paid for something that isn't being used.
I'm guessing that's the boss's worst nightmare.
Well, yeah, kind of. Imagine you're paying for something and then you ask, okay, how is it doing? And you say, oh, we're using 10% of it. Then why did I pay so much for it?
It would
Right?
be the same thing as just like getting, I don't know, a gold brick, then placing it in the center of a museum just to look at it.
Yeah, pretty much. Right? Like it's such a waste. And I always use this example also for something else that's called. So this is a bit beyond the class, completely outside of the class actually. But like in networking, there's a protocol called spanning tree, and I love it because it's so bad because it makes it so essentially when you have switches, when you
Mhm.
interconnect switches with multiple Ethernet links together, just because if one Ethernet link falls, the other one can take over. You
Mhm.
have to prevent loops, and there's a whole process called spanning tree, which makes it so that it's effectively one of the links just doesn't do anything, doesn't forward any traffic. And so your boss is like, wait, so you're telling me I paid for this cable and it's not forwarding anything? Yes, but it's there just in case. Well, what do you mean? No, you make it do some work.
I would be
It's like you have two trucks. It's like you buy two trucks for deliveries, and you only use one of them, and you say, "Oh, the other one is there just in case." Like,
you
no,
see,
you
that
use
would
both of
be
them.
me. I would be the boss who would say, okay, it's fine. If it's just in case, I'm fine with it. Let me just buy another 5.
Exactly, right? It's ridiculous. So you want in an enterprise environment, you always have to think of the technology in relation to like its economic the economics of the technology you're using.
Yeah.
So back to our example with our Minecraft server, what virtualization allows us to do is to say, okay, I'm going to essentially merge all of these services into one physical server. So I only have one physical server, and then I have 3 operating systems running on it. So I have the FTP, the maybe this is a Linux server running the FTP app, and maybe this is the a Windows server running Windows operating system running the HTTP app, and then we have like another Linux running Minecraft.
The most important.
Yeah, absolutely crucial, man. You cannot have a sustainable model without a Minecraft server.
It just kills the environment.
Yeah.
You see that the Minecraft server shut down last night. Everyone's just gonna start crying.
How can we work with dude, that should be one of the perks. Like you sign up for a company and it's like you're trying to attract very competent people and you say, well, we have snacks and we have a dedicated Minecraft server. It's like, sign me in.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I would at the moment they start talking about Minecraft, I would already be signing the paper saying, "Okay, when's my vacation?"
Exactly. So the advantage is that suddenly you have only one server and it's running at 80% CPU utilization. So it's a bit high. It's a bit on the high side. You'd want to consider changing the CPU to something a bit more powerful. But hey, we paid for one server and we're fucking using it.
Yeah,
And it's a lot easier to manage because there's one physical machine, not 3.
yeah,
So it generates a lot less heat as well, meaning I'm gonna need a lot less ventilation in my data center.
yeah.
Like that's not trivial.
I'm pretty sure the boss would be happy.
Yes, exactly. He's very happy. And so then it's up to the IT team to make sure that you're sort of simulating a network inside of it because obviously these 3. So essentially it's from a physical perspective you have only one server.
Mm-hmm.
But from a logical perspective, so once you're inside the network, it actually really looks like you have three servers, right? Because you have three operating systems. So
Okay.
three servers, they each of them has a virtual CPU, a virtual set of RAM chips. They have a virtual Ethernet card, like a virtual network card as well. So you then have to decide, okay, like even, for instance, so uh, I'm more proficient in networking, and I can tell you that one big challenge for virtualization is actually deciding, how are we going to interconnect all of these things, knowing that all of this is just virtual. Like we have to
Okay.
virtually manage all of the appliances. But it is feasible and it's really cool.
It seems pretty cool.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the main reason why in an enterprise environment for servers you'd be using virtualization to save costs. Honestly, that's the main one.
Okay.
Another thing, and this is more geared towards developers. Developers, they really like virtualization and they love containers. They love using Docker all the time. Why? Well, because let's say you're working on an app, right? So
Yeah.
you're working on what could you be working on? A revolutionary Minecraft server, right? So you're rewriting the code for a Minecraft server,
Yeah.
let's say, and so you're developing it, you're working on it, and you know the specs, the exact specifications of the operating system that. So let's say you have your desktop. This
Mm-hmm.
is what you as a developer you work on your laptop, right? Maybe it's a powerful laptop or a desktop, who cares? But like this is your workstation.
Yeah.
And eventually you'll have what we call production environment. So production environment means the final, server. So
Okay.
this is production, and this is development. Well, if you let's say that you're both running Linux, right? Well, here's the problem. You clearly, obviously, don't have the exact same operating system in your development environment and in your production environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in your development environment, like you have a bunch of development tools, you have maybe like a web browser that isn't present on the production environment. You might have some
Yeah.
personal files. You don't have the same, and also you don't have the same Ethernet card. You don't have the same amount of RAM or CPU. Like it's just a completely different environment, even if it's the same core, even if
Yeah.
it's the same base operating system. So again, you have that issue that you don't know how things are going to interact with each other. So if you start developing your application directly on your development environment, maybe the app works on your dev environment, but maybe once you port it to production, it doesn't work. And then
Yeah.
you have to figure out, okay, what is it that's running on my development environment that makes it work, but isn't present on the production environment and make it not work.
Oh God.
Yeah, right. Have fun troubleshooting that.
No thanks.
Right. So what you can do instead is on your development environment. So this is your Linux OS. What you say is, okay, fine, whatever. I'll just run a copy of the production environment. Right? I just run a copy of it. And
Yeah.
I develop directly on that. This is where I'm going to be testing my app. And that way, so it can't be a perfect copy, but it's much more similar to what you have in production, right? And so then you can simply port this, make a snapshot, right? You make a snapshot of this and you send it to the virtualization server. And the virtualization server is like, okay, let me take this snapshot and I'll run it,
Okay.
right? And so suddenly, it doesn't matter where, like what your environment is to developing something. What matters is like you're going to create an isolated environment in which you're going to develop, and that isolated environment should be the exact same as the production environment.
Okay.
So this is really if you're going to be doing sort of development. And the from what I know, the tool that's most used for that is actually Docker.
Okay.
Docker with containers.